you. Hey, good day, everyone. Welcome to another DevOps Unbound live roundtable. DevOps Unbound is a bi-weekly video series where we explore topics related to DevOps, and we usually can do a pretty deep dive into them and have some great discussions. Excuse me. What makes it great is of course, our guests and panel members. About once a month, though, we do this format for DevOps Unbound, which is a live roundtable where, in addition to our esteemed panel members, we also invite you, our audience, to participate. How do you participate, you ask? Well, we use the Big Marker control panel system, the Big Marker webinar system. And as part of that, it's within the browser on the right-hand side of your browser screen for most of you. You will see our communications panel. If you look at the top of it, it's marked. You'll see headings for chat, QA, polls, handouts. Under chat, if you look at public, well, that means that's public chat. What you put in there is open to everyone. And as you can see, a lot of people have already come on. I guess they know what we do here. And they're telling us hello from wherever they are. Texas, New York City, Florida. I'm in Florida too. We've got someone from Italy. Ciao. Ciao from Italy, New Mexico, Minnesota. I hope you're staying warm. Oh, we got a whole bunch of people, India and all over the place. So please log in, let us know where you're from. It's always great to see what a global audience it is. But more than telling us where you're from, which we do appreciate, we also use this chat to communicate what you would like to discuss or what your thoughts are on what we're discussing with our panel. And you can do that in the public chat right in there. We'll try to participate. Our panel members are free to participate with it. But also, if you want to really ask a question of our panel, up at the top of that communications panel in your browser, you'll see a section marked Q&A. And if you go in the Q&A, you could write a question in there. It won't appear in public chat, but we'll see it. And I'll be able to ask our panel the question, and we'll get your answers on this. You see, we've got people from Venezuela and Tennessee. Welcome, welcome, welcome. Before I introduce myself and our panel, I realized I didn't introduce myself yet even. I wanted to just also mention that we are giving away 4 Amazon gift cards today, and I will announce the winners of those from people who have registered and are attending today's event. You see, my client is shockingly from Silicon Valley, from Brooklyn. Wow, this is great. Romania, I love it. Guys, so let me introduce our panel, and then we're going to jump into today's topic. As I mentioned, I'm your host. My name is Alan Schimmel. I'm the CEO of TechStrong Group, and I'm editor-in-chief of DevOps.com, Security Boulevard, Container Journal, host on TechStrong TV. And I'm also a co-host here on DevOps Unbound. DevOps Unbound, I should mention, is graciously hosted by our good friends at Tricentis, the worldwide leaders in automated testing. And many thanks to Tricentis for their support for the DevOps Unbound series, which has been going on now, I think, over a year. We've had some amazing, amazing episodes. My co-host on DevOps Unbound is our CTO here at TechStrong Group, as well as principal analyst at TechStrong Research. He's my friend Mitchell Ashley. Mitchell, hey, say hello.
Hello, hello. Good to be here, of course, and can't wait to talk about some myths about DevOps.
Yeah, which is today's topic. We're going to jump into in just a moment. And let us introduce you to our other 2 panel members, though. Next up is a good friend of ours. She's an esteemed author, a distinguished engineer at IBM, which is something it takes a lifetime, a career to achieve. But she's also a really good friend of ours who I always enjoy being on a panel with or at a conference together. It's our friend Rosalind Radcliffe. Rosalind, welcome.
Hi, Happy to be here. Glad to be here. And you got the book up faster than I could. There's my book.
We beat you to it. This is Rosalind's newest book, Enterprise Bug Busting. But Rosalind, beyond the book, why don't you give us a little bit of your background?
So I have been in IBM for 34 years. And the last number of years, I have been responsible for making ZOS DevOpsable. One of the myths we can talk about if you want is that ZOS is not, because it is. That was my job, and I've worked with the products, the technology to allow it to do that, as well as work with clients in their transformation. Most recently, and officially now, I'm actually working in IBM's CIO organization as the DevSecOps CTO. I just won a bunch of letters for my title now, no words, just title. Just
you got the alphabet covered, man. You're all good.
The alphabet soup.
Yeah, excellent. And, I should mention that, I started DevOps.com 8 years ago. And Rosalind has always been there. She's been a fixture for us. And, and not just for us here at TechStrong and DevOps.com, but for the DevOps community. And when the idea of DevOps and mainframes was a myth, or many thought it was a myth, Rosalind was out there preaching in the wilderness about how DevOps and mainframes can work together, and she's been proven right. So, Rosalind, thank you for that and all you do, and thanks for joining us. Last but not least, I want to introduce, and he's been a guest before on DevOps Unbound, Clint, is it Sprav? I always mispronounce it.
Sprav, you got it. That's perfect.
Hey, Clint, welcome back, and thanks for joining.
Thank you.
I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself.
Sure. So again, my name is Clint Sprav. I'm with Tricentis. Been with Tricentis about a year and a half now. Been in the software development as well as the software quality assurance and testing industry. So been seeing different viewpoints of DevOps and a lot of myths. So this is one of those topics I'm really excited to get into and really talk about. So thanks for having me again.
Always a pleasure to have you on, Clint. Thank you. All right, let's get started. So today's roundtable discussion is DevOps myths. As I alluded to when talking with Rosalind, almost from the day I started DevOps.com, there have been these myths associated with DevOps. Part of it, I think, is self-inflicted because we never had like an official manifesto or an official definition or official anything. It's kind of made up as you go. And part of it is because DevOps has become somewhat of an umbrella term that, encompasses so many different things. But, the kinds of myths I'm talking about, when I first started, there was this idea of DevOps is only for startups because only startups really need to be that nimble, agile, to appreciate DevOps. And what I always thought was interesting in the case of dueling myths, there was another myth. Oh boy, I'm sorry. There was another myth. I don't know how to shut this off, but I'm going to just kill the whole thing here. And there was another myth that not only was DevOps just for startups, but then there was one that said DevOps is just for big companies, for large enterprises. So you couldn't be both unless you were a startup that was also a large enterprise immediately, right? But so they were kind of diametrically opposed. But and over time, as often happens with myths, these things work their way out. So I'm going to ask Rosalind, if you don't mind, let's talk, what DevOps myths that you think have been proven true or maybe proven to be, full of hot air.
Well, I think almost all of the it's only fors. It's only for it's only for, it's only for unicorns. Actually, it's probably the one that was the most annoying one. It's only for that startup team, or it's only for the front end team. That's another one that I still hear. The reality is, it's a way of working. I mean, DevOps is culture. I actually think the biggest problem, it's not just the myths, it's the it's the people say DevOps equals. And anytime, almost every time somebody says DevOps equals, they have it wrong, because they usually say DevOps equals CI/CD or DevOps equals something in particular. It's only for these teams or whatever. All of those things take away what DevOps really is, which is culture. It's a way of working, which can apply to anybody, which isn't any particular technology or any particular thing. It's that culture of working together and breaking down the silos. And all of those DevOps equals all cause a problem. Agreed.
The only thing that it's really only for is anyone who wants to do it.
Okay, yeah. It's for everyone.
Right.
Yeah.
But fair, excellent point. Clint, how about you?
Yeah, I think for me, the biggest myth is the fact that there's really only one way to do DevOps. We talk about the whole fours and all of this, but what really gets me is there's this assumption that everyone's doing DevOps the exact same way, right? So if you're not doing it the way a Silicon Valley startup's doing, if you're not doing it the way this large manufacturing that has some little offshoot group that's doing it, that you're doing it wrong. And every company is just so vastly different. They have different needs. They have different application types and systems that they still have to maintain, but are still, really bringing in revenue. And so when I talk to customers, when they talk about, okay, how do you address DevOps, or how do you quote unquote do DevOps, right? I go back to, it's really about, let me understand your organization, your needs, your skill sets. What do you have in your organization, and how can we best help you? Because if I go in there and say, hey, you must do it this way, and be so direct, it just turns everyone off. So I think everyone needs to understand that, like you said, it's more of that collaboration and less about you must do it this way or you're doing it wrong. And everyone has successes in the various ways that it's been implemented.
Fair. Mitchell?
There's a lot to pick from. If I had to pick a group of them, DevOps means we won't have these jobs anymore. Fill in the blank. Operations, testing,
yes. ...
We only need developers, right? Of course, we do need developers, no doubt about that. If anything, it's elevated the role of operations. It's elevated the role of testing. We have some research that backs this up, that because DevOps has helped people come together and work more closely and collaboratively as teams, sort of the two pizza team concept, or whatever you want to use, it's actually helped bring everybody kind of into the same fold and work together, instead of, well, you're a square and you're a triangle and you're a circle, but we don't mix, right? Then squares are the best ones, the rest aren't. Baloney.
Just to kind of cause a problem with that sentence, I agree, but I think everyone becomes a developer is the difference in DevOps-ish. And I got to be really careful when I say this. Mm-hmm. I really think we need to start focusing on the mentality of storing artifacts, having pipelines, using automation for repeatable tasks. Whether or not I'm operations, test, or developer, I think those things that we used to say were developer activities are actually everyone's activity. And DevOps, it isn't that we don't have operations or we don't have test people. It's that everybody works like a developer in this new kind of world. So I absolutely agree. We don't get rid of those individual skills. But I do think when we think of DevOps, one of the myth problems that they say it's only for development is because it's all about storing artifacts and having a pipeline and all of these things that people associate with DevOps, which then translates to the developer role. And we should go, no, all roles do that. So it's changing the
There's
perspective.
elements of a developer work product within everything we do. But that's not to elevate the developer as some sort of alpha predator on the list. Professional testers, as our friends at Tricentis will tell you, are still professionals. SREs are professionals. They may be doing developer type things, but they're still professionals. And I'd love to dive in. Rosalind, you and I can do a whole show on this, but we've got a really active panel, a really active audience. And I've got some Q&A stuff I want to throw out here.
Yeah, we've got some really good comments.
Yeah, in the chat. And feel free to chat up the people if you'd like, right? We could have 5. We could multitask in the true DevOps style. We could multitask this stuff. But, so here's another big myth Ravi put up here. Scaling up and managing complexity is difficult in DevOps. And I could see where this started, right? Because, we used to do bubbles of DevOps, I called it, where it was just small teams doing DevOps. There was a period where moving from the small teams doing DevOps pockets within an enterprise to an enterprise-wide DevOps implementation. There were some lessons that needed to be learned there, some best practices that needed to emerge. But I think that's a myth that's been busted. Agreed, panel?
Yeah, absolutely.
If it hasn't been, then we have a bigger problem. Because if you don't do DevOps at scale, then you have an organizational problem. You can't do starting that way is great, but it's got to scale. If it doesn't work across an enterprise, then we need it to work across the enterprise.
And I think that myth comes because a lot of organizations, they just get stuck, right? They know that, hey, these are all the things we need to do. We know we need to integrate testing into our CI/CD pipeline. We know we need to implement all these different things that the DevOps gurus and everyone tells us we're supposed to do. But when they get stuck, they kind of revert back to, okay, well, this isn't working for me, so therefore DevOps isn't working, it doesn't scale, so you have to be this unicorn type company to get it to work. So I think to help, dispel that myth is the fact that every organization, because they are so different and they have all these different pieces, organizations need help to get over that hump. So I think when they get stuck, and everyone looks at it as if, okay, well, I can't be like them because they're just doing all these great things. But we're not seeing the things that are happening, beneath the iceberg, everything that's been going on to get them to that level. And I think that would really help dispel that myth as we start saying, okay, how did you do it? How did you go about it? Or you're more like me and my company set up and profile and, and resources. How do you do it? And then I think we can help dispel some of that and get to the realities of, how different companies can truly implement DevOps in their organization.
I wonder if it's, to your point, Rosalind, if it's a developer mindset, right? Not being a developer. It's thinking about, automating. It's thinking about not doing, throw it over the wall. It's thinking about flow through a process. And we might play in different parts or several parts of that pipeline, right? Or we have a specialty area that we're part of, but it's not an isolated part. It's an interconnected part. And one of the best developers I worked with said, why are you so good? He says, because I'm really lazy. I don't like to write code I don't have to write. It's like, well, make it easy, make the process simpler, make it flow easier, that kind of thing. And that's part of that mentality. You talked about culture. You can think of it as a mindset the developers have that I think we're spreading and adopting aspects of that in different roles.
Yeah, and just to add to that, I'm sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say there needs to be a better word for that. I mean, that's the reason. I mean, I say everybody becomes a developer because there are a set of tasks that we have associated traditionally with a developer. But honestly, a business person who's writing business process automation needs to follow the same practices. And you're not going to really call that business analyst a developer. So we got to come up with a new word, but that's the type of task. And I think but I think because of that, that's why we come up with some of these myths. I mean, test is absolutely critical. And there's some test things that there are people that are just really good at it, that really Yeah, that's really good. That's really important. But in many ways, they're doing a lot of things that developers supposedly do. So, how do we change the wording to help get rid of the myth that it's only for developers?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, part of that is the myth that testers are somehow failed developers or not
Yeah.
good developers. And that's why I like to use the word professional testers.
Said by a developer who that wasn't very good at testing.
Right. What can we tell you on that? Here's another one, and I think I will turn this question around. The Q&A was DevOps collaboration between business and IT, but it's a broader topic, which is DevOps just Dev and Ops? Where does security fit? Where does biz fit? We've seen Dev Biz Ops, right? Some companies have run with that.
AI ops, all kinds
AI Ops, all the
GitOps,
GitOps, all of these things. And so I would say one of the developments during my time at DevOps.com has been the growth of DevOps beyond just pure play Dev and Ops, right? And I think that's a myth that we've busted, is that DevOps goes everywhere, anywhere with this stuff.
And I like to say DevOps is a great Twitter handle, but it's not good for anything else. I mean, it's nice and short, so it's great.
It was a good domain name, Rosalind. Let me just
okay. Yeah, yes, you're right. It's nice.
Been very, very good to me, but
it's nice and
very,
short.
very good.
It's
quoted
nice.
Saturday Night Live, but go ahead.
It is short. It's very helpful from that standpoint, but it is not representative of what it is. It really is. If it's going to work, it's biz, dev, QA, sec, ops, but it's the whole spectrum in order to work. So it's one of those terms that is not representative of what it should be, but it's a great term for use because it's nice and short and easy to say. And we've got to get past this DevOps is DevOps, that it really is everything.
Absolutely. Well, let me tell you what it's not. It's not synonymous with CI/CD, as more than a few people in the chat have put in here, right? I always used to like to say that DevOps was the symptom, CI/CD was the cure, right? And but that doesn't make them synonymous, right? I think CI/CD helped us. I mean, think about where CI/CD came from when it was just CI, and then we attached the /CD, and now they're inseparably. Though sometimes you see them broken up again, right? But CI/CD is about software delivery. DevOps is about so much more than just that, integration and delivery. So I think that's another big myth, pointed out by our audience here, that we've busted over these years. What about some others?
There's another one in the chat, the regulated industries one.
Oh, God. You know where I learned that was full of crap? Excuse my bluntness. I used to love going, back then it was called, actually, what was IBM Think before it was Think, Rosalind?
I don't remember.
Something.
So it depends. We had so
there was 3 or 4 shows that got combined into Think.
So see, that's the problem. We had Pulse, we had Impact, and we had something else. But we had different events that all became Think.
The
Impact
one. And I used to go to with Randy and Salim back in the day. And what I noticed was who was giving me their DevOps transformation stories. It was almost entirely financial companies. It was banks, big banks. Her Majesty's Tax Service, the South African version of the IRS from South Africa. All of these things. And it really, taught me that regulated industries were not, laggards when it came to DevOps.
Well, and DevOps, things that help DevOps help regulated industries because you've got more automation, you've got more tracking, you've got more. There are all sorts of things that make DevOps and regulated industries go together really well.
Mhm.
And so that's why I think that's one of the worst myths out there, because it really is a tie, a correlation in general.
Yep. Man, we got some great shot. We could probably spend 5 days.
Well, I was just going to throw out there, I threw out of a sort of a, well, I'm probably going to get lambasted for this, but I threw out this idea of flow. You heard me talk about this at a recent company meeting, Alan. But it seems like that's what this is in part about. I may be being theoretical, metaphysical, kumbaya for a moment, but it seems like that's what we're about, is how do we reduce friction? How do we eliminate barriers? How do we make the process of creating software from the beginning to the end, and security and all the parts that are part of it, and make that flow easier, that it happens more quickly, smoother, with better outcomes. And it seems to be, for me, that I called it an earwig. It just keeps sticking in my mind of this idea of flow.
Yeah. Well,
And a few
when
folks
I
who
hear
use
you talk about flow, I start thinking about value stream management,
Mhm,
which quite
mhm.
frankly, in the last year and a half, is all of a sudden, like we used to think CI/CD was kind of synonymous with DevOps. I think people are starting to think flow, value stream management
Mhm.
is synonymous with DevOps. But again, I think it's part of it.
Mhm.
It's not all of it, certainly.
Right. Yeah, I would agree. And I think the other thing that kind of dovetails from not only the flow, but value stream management, CI, CD, is the fact that I think with DevOps, we put a huge emphasis on tools. So people think that if I have this so-called DevOps tool, that I'm doing the right things. And you have all these different DevOps stacks, and all of a sudden you got these hot DevOps companies that are IPOing and going public and all the other things. So people assume that, oh, okay, if I'm using these particular products, then I've got this DevOps stack. So it's all about the tools. And if you don't have this particular one, you're not doing it right. And you can't do it even if you're developing desktop applications, or if you're trying to maintain legacy applications. And so it becomes more about the tool versus the opportunity to really understand how should we properly go about doing this. And that the tool argument probably is the biggest myth that just drives me berserk.
And you know what I find interesting about this, and I'm sure Rosalind remembers this. Early on, when you used to talk about quote unquote DevOps tools with the DevOps Illuminati, as I would call them, right? The leaders of the community early on, that used to really irk them, because DevOps was not about tools. They would tell you DevOps was about people, DevOps was about culture, not tools. And the idea of a DevOps tools was as asinine to them as a DevOps engineer, right? They used to be crazy.
Yeah.
Those days.
Oh, they reject if you had that in your title. You can't use that in your title.
DevOps teams, DevOps. None of these, so DevOps culture. And the only reason I'll admit that I didn't quite object to having DevOps in my title, which, my first reaction was, wait a minute, let's come up with a better title, was that my role is to transform the culture within the CIO's organization and so I'm okay with saying we want to change the culture, and that's what we're driving. But having a DevOps team that does DevOps and everyone else works differently, using DevOps in that way just confuses everything. And DevOps tools are actually one of the worst, because having DevOps in your product name, you kind of go, well, what does that mean you do? If DevOps is culture, how do I have a tool? And so if we could get out of the myth, because there are lots of tools depending on what you're doing, and there are there are people that are helping change the culture, and I get that. but let's make sure we're using the terms the right way. If somebody's a CI/CD engineer or they're a CI/CD team, why aren't they called CI/CD? But DevOps is so cute. It's just a better name. That's why.
Yeah, no, it's as you said, it's a catchy social media title, a good domain name, and it's a good prefix, right?
Yeah, it also helps on LinkedIn for a lot of folks, right?
Oh, you know. I mean, we obviously run a few different LinkedIn groups, and it just amazes me the amount of traffic and people who join it. I'll tell you another myth that I was glad to actually, really, really glad to see broken. And again, this one was personal to me. When we first started doing DevSecOps, right? I didn't know what to call it. At first, we called it rugged DevOps, right? My friend
Rich Mogul.
James Wickett. Well, it was James Wickett who started the rugged.
Oh, that's right. James did. You're right.
Yep. And, Rich and those guys adopted it. Josh Corman, a few others. But so many of our friends, Mitchell, in the security industry were like, oh, BS, right? There's no such thing. It's all just DevOps and putting a sec in. It's just marketing mumbo jumbo, blah, blah, blah.
DevOps. We can't.
And we're the people who say no, God darn it, like the knights who say knee. From the
shrubbery.
Right, remember those guys, Mitchell, from during the Way.
Monty Python
and the Holy Grail. The knights who say knee. But anyway, I'm showing my age here. But over the years, we've seen DevSecOps is real. The idea of shifting security left, the idea of asking developers and testers and everyone involved in the software delivery to care about security, to make security part of their responsibility, has really caught on. It's really caught on. And I will tell you, in spite of software supply chain attacks and everything else we've lived through these last couple of years, our security on applications today is many times better than it was prior to DevSecOps. Now, is DevOps responsible for that? Maybe, partially, but it's hard to argue that our security posture today is improved versus where it was 7 years ago. And I think DevSecOps is part of that, big part of it. Anyway, I'll get down off my soapbox on that.
Well, I think DevOps culture of trying to bring people together, trying to automate, trying to improve the reliability of the system, all of that, the only thing it could do was bring security and everyone else along. Because if you don't include security, you don't have a solution anyway. You can't have a DevOps culture unless security is part of it. And I think the reason we do DevSecOps now is so that people think more about security, because reality is there are too many things going wrong. I mean, the Log4j thing that hit, there are lots of open source packages that are having things happen that people need to remediate quickly. There's lots of considerations, and I think security is just one that everybody needs to be thinking about more, and that's why it got thrown in. I sort of wondered why it didn't first become Dev QA Ops or something. We needed to get that. A DevOps culture doesn't work unless testing is part of it. And so security being thrown in is because security is such a central focus that everybody has to think about. But somehow we have to make sure everybody remembers all of these pieces are part of it.
One of the things I think that also influenced all of this is the evolution of our software architectures. We refer to it as monolith now, and SOA for service-oriented architecture, now cloud native. As things got smaller and smaller, that allowed us to deliver smaller and smaller components and do many of those faster rather than one thing that took 3 or 6 or 9 months to deliver. Well, that now that you can do that in small increments, you've kind of got to rethink about how I'm going to do that. In an environment where I also have really a lot of resources available to me in the cloud, as opposed to fixed set of computing and storage and network assets. That all also helped create this environment to how do we automate, how do we create workflows and automation across all of that and deliver things that more than once a week or once a day. So it seems like it's not just a DevOps thing, it's also the environment that this has grown up in.
Yeah, and I think the other reason that probably QA didn't get added to the middle of that is because I think there are a lot of organizations, they assume that QA is just doing the traditional old school UI testing, although everyone's assumed that you're doing unit testing. When they look at, okay, you got this UI testing is going to slow us down, so just cut it out. But there's a lot of things that really define quality that I think that's left out. You have feature flags, which is a part of quality. It's not testing per se, but it's software quality. So when you look at quality overall, I think those are the things that cause that myth as to there's no testing in DevOps, or no one does testing, or you're only doing unit testing, things of that nature. But no, it's just in terms of how with the rapid pace, things have been changed, things have modified, but that assumption that, okay, or UI testing is way too slow for us to be able to implement this, and we can't do it, and we can't do it properly. So I think that's probably the main reason it was left out. And then the goal was to really target a lot of these organizations through the developers and less on the testers, because they're trying to go where the money is. So I think that's the economic piece plays a huge part in that.
Absolutely. Here's another one I saw mentioned in the chat. Well, they mentioned one aspect of it, but again, it's a Gemini, right? Where it comes at it from both sides at the same time. And that is that DevOps cannot succeed without top-down support. So it has to be, if not originated, at least supported by the very highest levels of your IT organization or the organization itself. And then the flip side of that, though, is that any DevOps implementation that is kind of forced down the throat of developers and operations people is bound to fail. You must have the support of the people down here in order for it to succeed, because you can't change what those people do. They do what they want, or they'll get other jobs. Hey, maybe that's the reason for the Great Resignation. But
well, on that argument, do you think the people who started doing DevOps went and got approval from the C-levels to be able to do it?
Not originally. Not originally.
I think there's two sides. I mean, I think there's a reality in the middle. I really think you need both. I think you need people who want to change, and you need some level of support from the top, because it's really, well, depending on the company, it's really hard to actually change and put in a DevOps culture in just one team if they don't have some support to make some of those changes. If I don't have permission to deploy into production, I'm not going to get it without getting permission. So there's probably, the myth is wrong, because you can't start either place, but there is some amount of, I need some level of support. Maybe it's not C-level. I mean, that might be way too high. I need some level of support high enough that lets me change the way of working, because I'm changing the ways of working. But I haven't seen many successful that didn't have people at the bottom wanting to do it. I mean, unless you had teams who really wanted to change, I haven't seen many, though I'll give you caveats. There's some that have. They've come from the top and been successful. So
that's a tough road, though.
Yeah. That one's a lot harder. You usually have to
versus volunteers, as Alan likes to say. Right?
Well, you ask for the volunteers from the top, so it didn't come from them, but you get them, whatever. But yeah.
Yep. Interesting. We see a reference in the chat around log4j.
Yeah.
Or LO4j. I haven't I don't think that was a DevOps problem per se, but I think what's happened is, quite frankly, we build these modern apps and infrastructures using open source components. And in terms of supply chain, the virtual mimics the real life, right? We found out what happens when you rely on one country to supply all of your surgical masks, right? And then that country stops exporting surgical masks and you don't have any. Well, it's the same thing when all of our infrastructure or apps depend on one piece of code, and that code then has a defect, right? We all pay the price. But I don't know if that's a particularly or specific a DevOps problem. Are we pinning that problem on the DevOps donkey's tail? Or is there a DevOps solution to it?
I would contend that those organizations or teams that were farther down the DevOps cultural transformation could deal with the Log4j thing faster than those who were not. So if you had enough and honestly, actually, even if you didn't have a DevOps culture, if you at least had a CI/CD pipeline, you were more likely to be able to fix it faster than if you didn't. And I do think technology and the pipelines, though DevOps does not equal pipeline is a critical part of a DevOps transformation, and that automation does make handling things like Log4j easier, but you have to be looking for it in the first place. I think Log4j hopefully triggered the thought process. I need to be scanning. I need to be paying attention. I need to be thinking. I know when I learned about development, we didn't go out to the internet and pull code in the same way. But when we did share code ideas between us, we thought about the code that we were bringing in. With these open source packages, you don't think about the code in the same way. And I think that cultural change to thinking about the code that you're bringing in is also really important.
Log4j jumped to the top of the list, not because it was a vulnerability for logging in. Yeah, it was impactful, but it's the huge breadth of the impact because of where Log4j was used, the widespread use of it. And, I think maybe we should think about maybe DevOps is part of our resiliency, just like we think about our software architectures being more resilient. Vulnerabilities are going to happen no matter what we do. Apply AI to it, you name it, it is still going to happen. And it's our ability to respond to it, whether it's as wide and deep as Log4j, or in our own app that isn't a part of code that didn't get executed. We have to be able to respond to those. So I think maybe that's part of where you were going, Rosalind, is it's our ability to respond. And in that process, wherever it happens, is what kind of matters.
Yeah, I don't think we can necessarily stop those type of defects, vulnerabilities, but we can pivot quicker and respond to them quicker, with the DevOps mindset, if you will, DevOps culture. Hey, I wanted to just take a quick minute, guys, and announce we have 4 Amazon winners, as I mentioned at the beginning. The winners today are Joe A., Maureen G., Dave S., and Olga V. So congratulations to the 4 of you for winning Amazon gift cards. Spend it well. Enjoy it. Thank you for registering and attending today's roundtable. We have as I said earlier, we can go on for days just with what our audience has put in here. But I wanted to start bringing this thing in or wrap up. We usually do these for 45 minutes is our roundtable. And we're at 45 minutes now, so we'll take some time to wrap up. But first of all, Clint, I wanted to thank you because you know what? Whenever whenever we ask, you always answer the door for us, right? And I appreciate you coming on here. So I wanted to give you the opportunity to start our kind of wind down, with what can people take out of this? We've had a robust discussion. What do you want them to remember and take out of this?
Great question, and thanks again. I would want the audience to really take away from this is that you're not necessarily doing it wrong when it comes to DevOps, but really take a broader view of what it means to your organization, right? Everyone's different. I have 2 kids. They couldn't be more opposites than you can imagine. And I think we have to approach DevOps in that same manner, and we have to look at our organization. So what I would suggest is, don't necessarily compare yourself to how company A is doing it, but look at what is going to be best for my team and my organization, and how can we get through this? So that's what I'd like to be the biggest takeaway for everyone.
Agreed. Good stuff right there. Rosalind, and again, thank you for all, not only what you do with us, but for the community at large. But what do you want people to take out of this and remember and take home?
Well, I think I absolutely agree. DevOps is the culture that you make it. It's the culture that you're trying to transform your organization to. And you can't copy company A or company B, but we need to learn from each other. And the DevOps community is really good at sharing. This is just one example. All of the things that you all do are examples of that sharing of best practices. We need to hear and learn from what other people have done so we don't necessarily make the same mistakes. You can't copy exactly company A, but you can hear what they did, and you can take that and take those lessons learned. You don't need to start at ground zero. We've got 10 years, 20, how many ever years of DevOps practice? Sorry, I think DevOps started long before the term DevOps existed. We've had this for a while, this automation. But this culture, learn from the community and share in the community and work in the community, because the more we share, the more we all learn from each other, the better off we're all going to be. Because Log4j, yes, it was big, but it's code, it's software. We can't write, there's no perfect software. I mean, sorry, there's just not going to be perfect software. So we all have to work together to make sure that we're improving, because software is now everywhere and our world depends on it. And so it's really important that we get it good enough so that lives aren't affected as they could be.
Absolutely. Mitch, before I go to you, someone had asked, they didn't hear the 4th name well. So the 4th winner was Olga V, like Olga Corbett. Is that too old for most people to remember Olga? I think it was Munich 76. But anyway.
That's going back. Yes.
That's going back. I was a little boy myself.
On the Wayback Machine.
Olga V is our
The DevOps Wayback Machine.
But there was DevOps then too. We just didn't call it that.
We just didn't call it that.
I don't know. Back then, that's probably pushing it a little. Sorry.
Okay. And also, before Mitch goes, I want to echo what Mitchell put in chat, which is, these roundtables are only as good as the audience makes them. And this was a great audience. I loved having every single one of you on here participating. I appreciate it. Keep coming back, please. But Mitchell, go ahead. You give it to you.
I think it's about not being the smartest person in the room. You're never going to be the smartest person in the room, because everybody is smarter at something than you are. And just like this conversation, DevOps being a multidisciplinary, cross-functional team, same thing here. We're having some great conversation. And I would argue some of the comments are as more profound than anything certainly I said here, maybe others on the panel too. There's just some fantastic viewpoints and ideas, and ultimately we're on a journey, and you can go fast alone, but you can go far together. So I appreciate everybody being together with us on this journey.
Absolutely. And we appreciate Tricentis sponsoring DevOps Unbound. We couldn't do that. We couldn't do these shows without them. So
Great
many
folks.
thanks to our friends at Tricentis. Check them out. We will be back, I guess, in another week or every other week. So 2 weeks. It won't be a live roundtable. It'll be a DevOps Unbound video session. You can catch it on TechStrong TV or at Digital Anarchist or on DevOps.com after that. And always good stuff there. Guys, all three of you, thank you so much. Thank you to our audience. I thank Tricentis. Thanks to our engineering team behind the scenes who make this happen, Julio and the team. Appreciate it. Thank you all for attending. We couldn't do any of this without an audience. So until next time, this is Alan Schimmel wishing you all to be well, be strong, tech strong. Take care, everyone. Bye-bye.